What a better way to celebrate the 100th episode of Wookie Drives than to circle back where I began, with me writing about a Saturn I bought. This is my new to me 2001 Saturn SWP. Yeah, you see that right. This is a right-hand drive Saturn wagon known as the SWP. Possibly the weirdest and most interesting of all the Saturn S series. I won't go too deeply into the history of the S series and the brand as a whole, as I feel that's something safe for the run-of-the-mill S series. No, this is a Postal S series. Something that was only offered for 3 years as a result of GM betting on a market that they didn't have a foothold in, taking to a product, while good, wasn't really as good as the cars that sold from that said market. So as a result, I present you here today with possibly the weirdest variant of the S series, the SWP. Long story short, Saturn was GM's first proper attempt at producing a modern compact sedan that could competitively compete against Japanese imports. Earlier attempts such as the Cavalier and Citation were not as good, to put it best. But GM spent an enormous amount of money to develop what it would tout as a new type of car company. Initially intended to be sold under one of GM's existing brands, by 1985 Saturn was split into its own company. Saturn was allowed to develop their own chassis platform, their own engine, their own dealers, and their own factory in Spring Hill, Tennessee. Their dealers even touted a no-haggle policy on pricing, which was unheard of at the time, but commonplace now with used car superstores such as Carvana. Of course, this led to GM's other brands balking at the freedom the new kid was allowed while they were being made to consolidate their platforms and engines, and over time, Saturn would essentially become home of GM's European models sold in America, on top of rebadges of other American GM models such as the Outlook and the Relay. But the original Saturn S series was a bright spot in the GM lineup that was seemingly getting left behind in the world. This was a car that was forward-thinking for the time, with its overhead cam engines and composite body panels. Compare this to GM's other compact offerings at the time, the J-body Cavaliers and N-body Grand Ams. This was something truly with its eyes towards the future. Saturn was truly ahead of the curve at the time. It would become a crying shame of what the brand would decay into after the time of its death. Anyways, the S series was launched in 1990 as a 1991 model. It would initially launch as in sedan and coupe forms, known as the SL and SC respectively. A wagon model known as the SW would be introduced in 1993. The only two engines available were either Saturn's dual overhead cam 1.9-liter LLO i4 or the single overhead cam LKO. Both engines would get upgrades during the entire lifetime of the S series. Now, the engines were hooked up to Saturn's in-house MP 5-speed manual or 4-speed autos. The engines would be the first model indicator for most of these S series, with the single overhead cam engine getting a 1 and the dual overhead cam getting a 2. So a coupe would either be known as SC1 or SC2, sedan SL1 or SL2, and wagon SW1 or SW2. There was an SL3 model planned with all-option standard and a 6-cylinder engine derived from the Saturn 4-banger. It would never come to fruition. Another thing that wouldn't see the light of day would be a convertible and a crossover SUV versions. But those would finally get greenlit after the S series ran its course, with their own distinct models known as the View and the Sky and the Aughts. The S series would live on for 3 total generations, all evolutions of what made the S series great. The second gen would be introduced in 1996 and see the car move past its float and roof design that would share with many Pontiacs and Oldsmobiles at the time, and the final gen being introduced in 2000 with its styling being mostly an evolution of the second gen. Now let's get to the elephant in the room. This is a Postal Saturn known as the SWP. This is a right-hand drive wagon sold directly to rural mail carriers. In a sense, it's a right-hand drive SW1. Now the Saturn S series kinda has a weird history with right-hand drive. Saturn had planned to enter the Japanese market from the get-go. As early as 1992, they had right-hand drive coupes, sedans, and wagons rolling around. But GM wanted to build a dealership network in Japan before entering the market. Right-hand drive cars would be built in Spring Hill and then imported to Japan. The process was slow, and Saturn didn't actually start selling in Japan until 1997. It was a flop. While the brand was a decent success in America, as it took an almost Japanese approach to building an American car, the car just wasn't up to the snuff to take on the Japanese on their own turf. While they may have seen somewhat better success if they had hit the market sooner, launching in 1997 saw two big things that deeply hurt sales. The consumption tax that saw private car ownership in Japan shrink 10%, and the recession from the bubble economy bursting deeply hurting car sales across the board. In the end, Saturn only built 19 dealers in Japan and sold only 4,324 cars across 4 model years. Now, while this was going on, Saturn was busy building right-hand drive cars here in the States. While sales in Japan were going horribly, they did see a small opportunity to offload some of these right-hand drive cars here. Rural mail carriers. You see, most mail carriers will drive something with either a bench seat or something without a center console. That's why you see a bunch of old W-body Buicks, Dodge Caravans, and Honda CR-Vs being used to deliver mail. Another route for people to go to is buying a right-hand drive car from an importer. And a common car I see around here are Toyota Sprinters and JDM Honda CR-Vs. Finally, the third group we see is a small group of right-hand drive cars sold every year new to mail carriers. The standard bearer from this group is and has been Jeep. But in the 1990s, Subaru was their biggest competitor, with them selling right-hand drive legacy wagons new to carriers. In a move you kinda have to call brilliant, even if the numbers sold were peanuts in the end, Saturn made their little right-hand drive wagons available to mail carriers in the States. Unfortunately, it's not as roomy as the Legacy, and both the Legacy and the Jeeps at the time were definitely more capable in winter climates. But the little Saturn is great as it's very maneuverable in tight spaces. This is what you see here today, known as the SWP, which is short for Saturn Wagon Postal. It's essentially what you expect it to be, a right-hand drive Saturn wagon. Now, this one has over 226,000 miles, has had some modifications to make things a little easier for mail use. The passenger seat has been removed in favor of this homemade bench for tubs and trays of mail, and the rear bench seat has been removed to maximize space. There is a yellow flashing light that is hardwired, but it's old and isn't that visible and is in need of replacing. Of course, the door magnets are taped on because of composite door panels, and various interior panels are falling apart because this is a 22-year-old GM product that's been used for daily mail delivery, and that's very hard on vehicles. On the road, it's a Saturn. Not quick, and while it is light and somewhat tossable, it feels archaic compared to modern cars. Steering is kinda heavy, and it kinda floats compared to cars from the last decade. But at the same time, you have to keep in mind that this Saturn wagon has had a hard life. Mail delivery is incredibly hard on vehicles. You are making anywhere between 650 to 900 stops during a route, and rural routes range anywhere between 40 to 100 miles, depending on where and how they run. Do that for 6 days a week and for 22 years, and yeah. Brakes and tires, those are the two things you will go through at a much higher rate over other cars. This one does need some work. The biggest issues are the left front wheel bearing is howling horribly, and the power steering rack is leaking at an extremely high rate. Other things needing addressing are the aforementioned pilot light that's almost not a light anymore, and the lever for the fuel door and hatch in between the door and seat is no longer mounted to the chassis, and it's kind of flopping everywhere. I know a lot of people love postal vehicles. They're like a fire truck that you can drive yourself. But I need you to heed this warning. Unless you need a right-hand drive postal vehicle to deliver mail in, you don't want to buy a former postal vehicle. They are beat to snot. Heck, the LLV is almost a 40-year-old design that was last built 18 years ago, and every single one still in service is held together with hopes and dreams. These mail vehicles are beaten down. They will be scratched. They will have dings from mailboxes. The brakes and suspensions will be tired. The interior is falling apart. Because these are and were working cars, and they will show it. The right sides of these cars almost always are dented, scratched. You're hitting mailboxes, you're hitting bushes, you're hitting garbage cans that people like to put in front of their mailboxes, you're hitting signs and flags that people like to put in front of their boxes. You are going to destroy a car delivering mail, and it's not going to be pretty. As I mentioned at the top of this video, this is my newly purchased 2001 Saturn SWP. I bought this little car at the start of the 2023 to use as a mail carrier vehicle. For those who have been following this channel for a while, you might know that I worked in racing, specifically the NASCAR Xfinity series, for over a decade. Well, after years of putting my body and mind on the line, I needed a change, and the Postal Service has been that change of pace that I was looking for, on top of offering pay and benefits that I rarely saw in racing. It's not a job for everybody, as you'll be putting in long hours at times, and it can get incredibly hectic around the holidays. But I enjoy it, I truly do. I wouldn't change my experience in racing for anything. I learned a lot, and I got to travel the country many times over, and I got to do and see things that many people wouldn't dream of doing. But that job is something I'd only recommend for young single dudes, and honestly, as I entered my 30s, I felt my time in that world was done. Becoming a mail carrier felt like a new chapter being started, and I look forward to my future in the Postal Service. When searching for a vehicle for mail service, I was originally leaning towards a third-generation Dodge Caravan, mainly because, especially around Christmas time, we get a crap ton of packages, and I felt the Caravan would be the best way to go. However, around Christmas time, I re-aggravated my right knee, and that narrowed my search to something right-hand drive. Reaching and leaning in non-right-hand drive vehicles was becoming an issue for me. Eventually, I do want to go the route of a Mitsubishi Delica, as Amazon packages can get incredibly heavy around haul times, but 9 times out of 10, the little Saturn is more than enough car for me. It needs a little TLC, but it will serve me well. I am getting the wheel bearing and steering rack fixed, but aside from that, it's an incredibly solid little car. These little Saturn S-Series cars can take a beating, and that's why mail carriers who drove them back in the day loved them. Their small size makes them very maneuverable, and it doesn't need a 3-second 0 to 60 because it's a freaking mail vehicle. This video has sort of been a full circle video for me. When I started this channel in 2017, I made my first video with my daily driver at the time, a 2005 Saturn Ion base model with the 5-speed manual. That very car, the Ion, was what replaced the S-Series in 2003. But while weird in its own right, GM's cold grip is starting to seep in. The Ion no longer sat on a Saturn-specific platform, as it shared its Delta platform with the Chevrolet Cobalt, Chevy HHR, Pontiac G5, and Opel Astra, on top of sharing its drivetrain with those cars. At least it wasn't a complete rebadge like the later Aura and Relay, but the writing was on the wall. Saturn wasn't getting the special treatment it got at the beginning, and that would be its downfall. So to have my 100th video on the very car the Ion replaced, let alone being a car I personally owned, full circle. The Saturn S-Series was a very important car for GM as it helped the company usher itself into the 1990s. It was a surprisingly forward-thinking product for the company, especially for the Roger Smith era. And the SWP happens to be possibly the weirdest of all the S-Series out there. Despite the S-Series being at the end of its long run, it still feels like it's full of hope and optimism. This was a car that was so drastically different from anything else GM was doing. The Ion, while decent in its own right, just doesn't have that because of the shared components with other period GM Delta cars. Saturn died a slow, painful death in its second decade, and the lack of clear vision led to the brand getting the axe in 2009. Anyways, I've rambled on for too long, waxing poetic about the brand and the Saturn S-Series. 2001 Saturn SWP. It's a fresh, weird car in my fleet, and it's been working hard hauling the mail. This has been episode 100 of Wookie Drives. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you once again for watching another episode of Wookie Drives. This week's episode comes courtesy of me, the Wookie, now Postman Wookie. If you have a car or truck you'd like to see on the show and happen to be in the Charlotte, Mooresville, North Carolina area, email me your submission with your car at wookiedrives@gmail.com. That is wookiedrives@gmail.com. That's right. Submit your car to wookiedrives@gmail.com. Don't forget to give the video a like and drop a comment in the comment section. Any sort of interaction with this video really helps this video in the algorithm and really helps these small channels grow. Share with all your Saturn and postal vehicle friends. And finally, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell for notifications for more Wookie Drives like these. Thank you so much for watching and have a good day.
Saturn is sending cars to Japan that are just like ours with one exception. The Japanese drive at the wheel over here. They also drive on the left side of the road. Otherwise, their Saturns are basically the same. Same dent-resistant doors, same steel-spaced frame, same standard safety features, crazy drivers. So stop by your local retailer and check out their Saturns. Hello? Hey, can you hear me? Hello? This is a drag.